This is the second episode of Commonly Vulnerable, so thank you for clicking on this video or listening here on Spotify. This is with Denise Lee, who is an absolutely incredible woman who has taken her athleisure company from 0 to 7 figures in 18 months and now is reaching 8 figures by the end of this year. Her company is called Alala, so definitely check that out. That's A-L-A-L-A. In this episode, we talk about a whole plethora of things from is college really worth it, and why she regrets getting her MBA. We dive into what it's like being an immigrant from Singapore and moving to New York City, as well as other topics of what it's like to actually be a business owner and running your own ship. Really excited for this episode, so go take a look, check it out now. Welcome to the second ever episode of the Commonly Vulnerable podcast, where the theme of this is let's get vulnerable, let's open up.
Okay.
So I'm here joined by Denise Lee, the first person ever to be on my podcast that is one, a woman, and two, shares the same last name as me.
Yeah.
So I'm very, very excited to kind of dive into our conversation today because you have such a remarkable story of coming from Singapore to New York and building this incredible business. And before I jump into anything, would love for you to kind of take just a few moments, tell us a little bit about yourself, where you come from, what you're up to.
Yeah. So my name is Denise Lee, and I am the founder and CEO of Alala, which is a women's athleisure brand that I founded 9 years ago. I grew up in Singapore and moved to the States for college. So I've spent half my life in Asia and half my life here in the States, primarily in New York City.
And so far, what's that life and that transition between Singapore and New York been like for you?
It's been really lovely to have, both experiences. I'm so grateful to have grown up in Asia and, been able to experience that that continent and being in Singapore, I think really just connects me to my Asian roots in a different way. And, being able to move to New York, one of the reasons I did that was because I was so passionate about the fashion industry and wanted to be in a big city and really challenge myself to become the best of the best. And so I think I've grown a lot as an adult in New York City and been challenged in so many ways that I wouldn't have if I stayed in Singapore.
What were some of the challenges that New York presented to you that you wouldn't have seen back home if you stayed? So
for me, I was very, very lucky to grow up in a very sheltered and an environment where I was very much taken care of. Everything was very comfortable at home. And I feel like moving to New York all by myself really forced me to be independent. It forced me to, make a lot of decisions for myself and create a life for myself that was brand new versus, just continuing to be a part of my family and a part of my friend group from back home.
And when you moved to New York, one of the things that you told me yesterday I thought was really interesting was growing up in Singapore, everybody looks like you. Mm-hmm. Everybody is mostly of Chinese descent, and everybody speaks English for many of the watchers, viewers, and listeners that didn't know that. But my question really is you came to New York City, and that was the first time in your life being a minority. What was that experience like for you growing up where everybody looks the same as you, and then all of a sudden you move to America and it's like, oh, wait,
yeah.
I'm kind of like one of the smaller portion of people here.
Mm-hmm. I think of it like kind of a reverse culture shock in a way. In Singapore, over 90% of the population is Chinese. And so to call yourself Asian is not an identity that any of us had growing up, right? Maybe you were Chinese or you were Indian or Malay, but you were not Asian.
And no one's Asian in Asia.
Yeah, exactly. Like people, here don't call themselves Caucasian because it's not really a thing. It's not really something that you have to consider part of your identity. So, moving to the States was the first time I had to self-identify as being Asian. And it was very interesting because it came with a lot of people's, understanding of what that means. And so being in the States was the first time anybody ever said like, oh, your English is so good. Like, how did you learn English? When we had grown up in school and everything, being taught in English and just English being the language that everybody spoke. And not to say I've experienced like severe cases of discrimination or anything, but you do notice there are times that, oh, this person is looking at me or interpreting my physical appearance in a certain way that I was never used to growing up. And so I think it's just adjusting yourself into, okay, now like I belong in this new category of people that I've never thought that, I had to think about before. So it was really interesting to experience that. And I'm very proud to be Asian. I'm very proud to be Chinese. And so I think, it's just a part of my evolving identity.
Was there ever a moment where you realized that you were a minority and you were being judged because of that?
Yeah. Sometimes, in New York, there's a lot of really beautiful stores and, I love fashion. So you just get those experiences. Maybe you stepped into a store and somebody, I wasn't treated well, or, somebody just says something offhand that you're like, wow, like, I think that was because like I'm Asian and not, a different race.
Was there like an example of that specifically you recall?
What I do recall is that when I was in college, these girls wanted me to join their Asian sorority. And I was actually like so against that because I didn't want to just be pigeonholed as one of those Asian girls who only hung out with other Asian people. Not that there's anything wrong with that, but like I wanted kind of the full experience. So actually, instead of joining the Asian sorority, I actually made it a point to just join a regular sorority because I wanted to have that like fuller experience. So yeah, that's something that comes to mind.
And how was that? Like, was there ever any tension with like you and the Asian sorority? Or did they outcast you? Because it's like, oh, she's one of us, but because she's not with us, she's with the other group. Like, was there ever any weird business with that, or was it always just nice and chill?
Yeah, I think, like those relationships obviously didn't develop the way that, it would have if I had joined that Asian sorority. But to me, coming to a new country, you don't want to isolate yourself, right? I think it's very comforting to always be around people who are like you, who have the same experiences as you. And when I went to college, there was a group of Singaporean students there as well. But the same thing, like I tried not to spend all my time with them because then like what's the point of coming to school in a different country if you're not going to be open to new experiences and meeting new people and hearing their opinions on things. And so I was very conscious about that, especially in college where you had so much opportunity to meet so many different people.
Where do you think that natural curiosity for other people comes from? Because most people aren't like that. They'd rather stay in their nice little bubble or their nice community that they know and they understand. So you had the choice to join the Asian sorority group and you decided not to. You decided to go with the regular sorority group, and there's a common theme of your life where you have this intense curiosity and you don't necessarily care about just joining the group that you're most comfortable with. Where do you think that sort of confidence comes from? Was that how you were raised? Do you think it was just naturally instilled in you? Do you think it's your astrological sign? Like, where's that come from for you?
Yeah, I think my sense of curiosity has always been one of my superpowers. For me, I think a lot of it is innate, but I also modeled my parents, and they are also very curious people who always value learning. And it's not just book learning, but it's learning about life. Not that many people can take that step of moving halfway around the world by themselves, and I'm really proud of myself that I did that, and I've been doing it for so long. But I think like there's so much world to explore, and for me, like I want to be able to go out there and learn about it as much as I can in my lifetime versus just being very comfortable in a little bubble. I just think your life becomes so much more rich when you step out of your comfort zone. You do get uncomfortable, but you grow through that discomfort, you grow through that new experience, and I think you become just a more interesting, well-rounded person.
Is there a moment that you could think of where you felt really uncomfortable with a big change you made in your life and you grew from it?
Yeah, when I worked for my last boss, Chris Birch, that was a period of my life where I went through really intense discomfort and change. And I say that because, he is a very successful business person and entrepreneur, and just the level of which he spoke about business, his team spoke about business, and how they looked at business was so foreign to me. And I had just graduated from business school, and I thought I knew a lot because I just, graduated from a great MBA program. But going into an environment where people have had astronomical success and expecting you to fit in with their group of friends, group of business associates, that really stretched me and forced me to learn how to speak their language almost and be a part of that group in a way that I've never had to do before.
So you worked with a billionaire for many years. I know you were his right-hand woman, but you're probably getting invited to all these events that you're saying with other men, women, and leaders of insane high levels of status and financial wealth and freedom. And I know that you grew up kind of adjacent to those people in Singapore. So what are some pieces of advice that you could give to people to connecting with people from huge levels of wealth that maybe most people might miss the mark on?
Yeah, I think one of the biggest lessons for kind of assimilating or fitting in that type of environment where, you're surrounded by extremely successful people is really to honestly take a little bit of a back seat. You are not going to be the smartest person in the room. You're not going to be the most successful person in the room. And that is okay, because what you can learn from simply sitting and observing and listening to really successful, really smart, really amazing people converse and talk and do business is amazing. And that is one thing that my dad really told me when I got this job with, Chris, was that this is an opportunity for you to absorb. This is an opportunity for you to listen and learn from really amazing people. And I think a lot of people in that environment feel the need to prove themselves, right? They want to say the smartest thing. They want to show, oh, I'm smart too, or I'm successful too, or, I have money too. When I don't think that's really the point. And I think you get a lot further by just observing and contributing in a meaningful way, but not making it about yourself.
So it's the classic be interested, not interesting.
Yeah, I think so.
And I think that's gone far for me in my life too. I remember many circumstances, especially when I first moved to Miami, and I would meet these high-level entrepreneurs. I would get invited to penthouses. That's just what happens when you're in Miami. And I distinctly remember there was one person in particular I made a great connection with, and it wasn't because I talked anything about myself. In fact, it was probably more 90% of the conversation was me asking genuinely thoughtful questions to get to know somebody more intimately. Yeah. And questions that aren't just oh, what do you do for a living? Instead of asking that, I'd be what do you do every day that excites you? And just that alone is a prompt that people don't typically get asked.
Yeah.
And they're excited to have the opportunity to talk about the thing that excites them.
Yeah.
And that's been such an easy icebreaker that then leads to such a domino effect of easy follow-up questions that I've used to connect with people, because it's never about me. It's never about you when you're in those situations. It's really about how do you make the person across from you feel comfortable opening up and allowing you into their space.
Yeah. I think that's a really brilliant technique, and it's something that everybody should develop. I think the skill of asking great questions does not come naturally to people. And for you to have developed that skill and understand the power of how that works is so important. And that's, part of what I did when I worked for Chris too, was to observe and then like distill, right? Distill into something that was a thought-provoking, interesting question to ask people. And it's such a huge skill. I think especially when you're working with very successful entrepreneurs, business people, they're so used to people coming up to them wanting something from them. Everybody wants something. You want money, you want connections, you want advice, you want whatever. That, you know, a lot of them are very closed off because it feels so transactional. And like they're not getting anything from it, honestly, right? You're asking them to give you something right away. And that doesn't feel good to people. And I think like your strategy of really coming in and getting to know somebody, asking an interesting question, and then listening to their answer and asking more better questions is definitely the way to go.
And never turning it around into yourself unless it fits.
Right, exactly.
Like that's been such a key networking hack for me is I genuinely am that curious about somebody's life. And I feel like that's why I've been able to make relationships quickly. It's because like I actually care about what you're telling me. And when I ask you a question, I have a genuine intention to like get to know your answer.
Yeah.
And to get a little bit deeper and like see if I can make a genuine connection there. I think most people, especially on the younger side of things, they think that life and networking is all about impressing others. And I think the way to do that is actually by being humble and staying chill and calm and recognizing that like, hey, you may not have anything to give to anybody in this room, but what you can always give is the space for somebody to have an excited answer to a wonderful question.
Yeah.
That's a skill that you're not taught.
That's a really good point. And what I wanted to add is people love talking about themselves.
Exactly.
So get them to talk about themselves and they'll think they had the best conversation with you because the whole time they just talked about themselves. And they're like, wow, like Jamey like asked like such good questions. We had such a good conversation because, you know, like unconsciously they were just talking about themselves the whole time. And I do see this also again with like younger people is they ask the question, but they're not actually listening to your answer. You know, they read somewhere that ask questions at networking events. It's good. But you can always tell when somebody's not really listening to your answer. They're looking around the room.
They're looking over your shoulder.
Yeah, they're looking over your shoulder, looking for somebody else to talk to.
It's like, oh, I actually recognize that person. Let me go 1 second. I'll come back.
That's not a great, that's a horrible feeling to give anybody. And so I think it's the sincerity that you bring to the conversation also that makes you memorable to people.
And I think from everything that we talked about, that's probably something you did really well when you were young and getting into these circles with these like New York billionaires was knowing, hey, there's a time I actually have to shut up and like probably just blend in. And most people don't have the humility to allow themselves to blend in during periods of their life.
Yeah.
I've talked to many people, they're like, I have to be the guy or the girl in this situation. And it's like, actually, like, it's probably best for the next 2 to 3 years. Because I've gone through that phase. I know you've gone through that phase where you're like, just be somebody that blends in and take notice. And then learn and download that info. Because if you constantly feel like you have the need to be that person in every room, you'll never actually own the room.
Yeah.
And you'll never earn the respect of people. That's something I learned at a young age. Is like, especially for young people, like, know that like you're in your learning phase.
Yeah.
I'm still in that too.
I think we are all always in a learning phase. You are never going to be the smartest person about every single topic in the world. It's impossible. And I think having always a sense of curiosity and willingness to learn is a trait that I see in even the most successful people out there. They're willing to sit there and ask good questions, say, I don't know anything about nutrition. I don't know anything about a real estate business, you know? And they sit with somebody who's an expert and they're humble enough to sit there and learn from somebody else. It's something my dad taught me. It's something that Chris, my old boss, taught me. It's a really, really underrated skill. And I think having curiosity about life is what makes life so rich and beautiful.
I agree.
If you're the smartest person in the room, like, forget it, you know, go find another room.
And I think what's really interesting that you're talking about there, and we've talked about this a lot off camera, is curiosity and asking the right questions to people and being more interested than interesting are genuine skills that matter and will make a difference in your life. They'll make a difference in your relationship.
Yeah.
They'll make a difference in your ability to learn things, including health, wealth, happiness. They just influence every aspect of your life. But they're not the skills that are taught in college.
Mm-hmm.
And we've talked about this many times. There's a lot of things in college that are just strictly not taught or 100% useless. And you got an MBA that you regret. Why?
I regret getting my MBA for a few reasons. One, it took me out of the workforce for 2 years. And those were 2 years that, looking back, if I could do it again, I would have rather worked at a startup for 2 years or worked for 2 years more with, another entrepreneur than getting educated in a school, a classroom environment. I just think reading a textbook, taking an exam, listening to lectures, that's passive learning. Like, yeah, you're learning, but you're not learning by doing, you're learning by listening, and you're learning by, taking exams.
From the outside looking in. It's like Gary Vee has this quote that I've always loved, and he's like, you can't read about doing push-ups.
Yeah.
Right? Like, imagine if, you wanted to become the best quarterback of all time. So you read all of the mechanics of throwing a football, and, you read all the autobiographies of, Peyton Manning and Tom Brady.
Mm-hmm.
But then you never actually went on the field. You just, kept consuming and reading. And I think there's, this consumption of information culture that might stem from college and universities as well, where all you do is consume and just buckets of information that you never actually apply. Your test is not an actual application of anything. It's literally just it's usually a test of memorization skills and not actual thorough understanding. It's never a real life scenario because there's no consequences of your failure other than a bad grade, which isn't even a real consequence.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly.
We talked about it, until you have the risk of, do I pay staff this week?
Mm-hmm.
Or do I pay myself right now?
Mm-hmm.
Until you know that sort of dance and that struggle, the business knowledge means nothing.
Yeah, I totally agree. And I think I know people like this who hide behind, education, who hide behind taking tons of courses and, keep consuming, information, but never taking the step to take any action. And you learn so much more from action than you do just reading. And I think, Brené Brown always talks about this poem that Theodore Roosevelt wrote about the man in the arena, right? If you are not, think about a gladiator arena. If you're not the gladiator in the arena fighting the fight, getting the dirt and the blood and getting beat up by your opponent, you don't have any say in that person's decision-making, that person's life. If you're sitting up here in the grandstands watching this person and just saying oh, he should have done this, or he should have done that, you're not contributing anything. And unless you are in the arena, don't even listen to those other people who are just sitting there watching you do your thing. And I think we all should strive to be in the arena and really experience life versus just, being on the sidelines.
I think that's incredibly powerful, but it's not that easy for everybody. I found myself, that's always been the way I've guided my life, but I know so many people that it's very difficult for them to even get into the arena in the first place. Mm-hmm. There's doubt, there's imposter syndrome that kind of creeps up. It's do I even deserve to be on the field in the arena or making a business or just pursuing my own dream?
Yeah.
And there's this Alex Hormozy quote that I love, and he said something along the lines, and I might butcher it, but it's, in order to make my dreams live, I had to kill the dreams of my fathers.
Wow.
And it's so profound because in order for you to allow yourself to pursue your highest version, you have to let the opinions of other people closest to you die. Mm-hmm. What's been your relationship with that? I know you have the traditional Asian parents that want the high grades, the good like the educations, and you come out here and saying like, I don't even wish I had an MBA. Like,
Yeah.
what's that relationship been like for you?
It's been very interesting because, yes, I did grow up in a household where, you know, kind of like your paper achievements were really, really important. But I will say both my parents are entrepreneurs. Both of them have had their own businesses in different forms over the years. So they truly understand the pain and suffering and the heartache that sometimes owning your own business will inflict on you. So I'm actually very, very grateful to have had parents that were always supportive of me going out and doing my own business and charting my own way. I know for a lot of people, their parents want them to be stable. Their parents want them to have a job that, you know, will pay them a great amount of money, but have the stability, no risk. And my dad told me something once that I'll never forget, which is that not everybody is suited to be an entrepreneur. And that is totally fine, you know? And so I feel like there's such a huge trend right now of everybody wanting to start their own business, be an entrepreneur, like you be a startup founder and all this stuff. But if you're very honest with yourself, and this is the reality, some people have families they need to take care of. Some people have, you know, loans that they need to pay off. And maybe it's the timing that's not right. Some people are very risk averse. They don't like the fear that comes with uncertainty. And that's fine. I don't think, you know, being an entrepreneur is the end all and be all of happiness and success in life. You can be successful in your corporate career. You can be successful in so many different ways. I just feel like it's so trendy right now. Everybody wants to jump on it. But even for me, somebody who, you know, financially, I'm stable. My parents were very encouraging. I really didn't have a lot of things that I was considering when I started my business. I was able to kind of jump into it right away. Even for me, like, the journey is very difficult. And there are times where I'm like, I wish I could just, you know, open my laptop 40 hours a week and get a 6-figure salary. Like, that's so appealing at times to me. And so I do think people need to like dig deep and be so honest with themselves, because being an entrepreneur and going on this journey is going to like tear you down to, I think, your most raw self. Have you felt that?
Many times.
Yeah.
Many times. There was a time about 2 months ago, 6 to 8 weeks ago. And it was the whole like cash flow situation.
Mm-hmm.
It was like, okay, like I stopped paying myself.
Mm-hmm.
And then I had to allocate capital in all these different ways. And there was a couple reasons for it. But that was like a really challenging scenario. Was like, some of my team members might be learning that for like the first time, because we talked about this off camera. You never make your problems like your team's problems.
Yep.
And so that whole dance of balancing like, hey, like I want this business to grow, but I also want my like personal bank account to grow, and I want like my team to grow and do all these things. And when you have certain things that are out of your control that happen, and it's like, okay, well, like that was all going down, and my grandma had passed away at like the same week. So there's just like all these like crazy things aligning in my life that made it very stressful. But I remember I had a conversation with my father, and I was just opening up to him about my stresses with the business and different things like that. And this was right before his mother and my grandmother passed away, maybe a week or two before. And I was like and I probably had 30 minutes of me just like ranting about the stresses I was feeling. I thank him so dearly for listening to it. And he looks at me and he was like, he basically said, he's like, I agree with everything that you're saying. And he was like proud of me for still like being in the fight, still being the man in the arena.
Yeah.
And he basically said, but your grandmother is going to pass away soon. And that's something I knew he was dealing with. Obviously, that's his mother. And he goes, so I want you just to put that into perspective, that you're dealing with all those problems, and I'm not diminishing them, but like those are the real things. And it completely reframed everything, because I realized, I was like, no, like my grandmother's health, like that's the only thing that really mattered. Right? The stress that my business had, that's not even real. Like I could shut down the business and like eliminate that stress today.
Yep.
Like, so therefore it doesn't exist. It's not real. And then I went a second after the call and just went deeper and deeper. I was like, my father is healthy. My mother is healthy. My sister is healthy. My friends are doing well. One of them is getting married this summer. Like, those are the things that matter. You know, like I'm healthy. Like I'm living in an amazing city and this brand new apartment in my own podcast studio. Like I have a lot to be grateful for. So I had to like really reflect and remind myself of like, what are the things that actually matter in life? And does my stresses in business align with that?
Yeah.
And I just felt like all of the stresses that I had in business were completely fabricated and didn't exist. And ever since then, it's been smooth. My anxiety has lowered. My stress has been pure. And ironically enough, business started to pop off.
Yeah.
Like I just got a bunch of clients. Like we started like the results just kept coming in and in and in, like on the client side as well. And so like we had a bunch of clients renew and it was like awesome.
Yeah.
So it was this weird shift in energy that allowed the universe to point everything that like I kind of needed my way. And I don't think it was an accident that my dad gave me that lesson at that time. Then the outcomes of my life started changing after that.
I love that. That's a beautiful, beautiful story. And I always think, you know, when people say, who are you? A lot of people lead with, when people say, who are you? A lot of people lead with their job, right? Especially entrepreneurs. Who are you? Oh, I'm the founder of this and this. I do this. I created this business. But I think if you tell yourself, okay, you're not allowed to say your job, you're not allowed to say your business, and you have to answer that question, right? Introduce yourself to somebody who doesn't know who you are. What would you say to them? And that's kind of the essence, I think, of more of who you are than your job title, your business, because you are not your business. And I think that is something that every entrepreneur has to go through that journey to realize for themselves. Just because your business sucks doesn't mean you suck. Just because you might have had a business that failed doesn't mean you're a failure. It means your business was a failure. And to tie your entire identity into your business is such a dangerous thing because you see your value go up and down with your business. And that's not the way that, you know, I try to live my life. It sounds like you realize that as well. Like there's so many things that are more important than that. And I think it allows you to enjoy the ride. It allows you to enjoy the ups and downs more than if you are fully putting your entire worth, your self-worth into the worth of your business.
I'm going to put that question to you. So how would you describe yourself? And you can't say the founder of Alala. Who is Denise?
I think I am a student of life. My personal goal for myself is to leave this world a better place than I found it, is to experience as much of life as I can. And it's to make as many other people's lives as rich as they can be. So for me, that's more of my guiding light than like, I am an owner of $100 million business, you know, because that may or may not happen and it may be completely out of my control. But what I can control is the light that I shine out to the world and, you know, the way that I make people feel. And so for me, and that wasn't something that came naturally to me. You know, I always because I grew up in an environment where it was like, okay, if you're an A student, you're good. If you're a B student, you're bad. It was so cut and dry, you know, and I think as adults, your salary or your net worth is something very easy for people to measure, right? people can't measure how good you make people feel. People can't measure all the lives that you impacted. People can't measure if you're shining a beautiful light out to people. And so, I went on a whole journey of teaching myself that. I'm still learning about it. I don't always, feel this way, but to have that bigger purpose in your life, I think is the secret of having a happy life,
I love that you said that because it reminded me of something that I witnessed this weekend at VCon with Gary Vaynerchuk. And I actually had a conversation with a bunch of my friends about this, but a lot of people don't realize, like, especially as you create content and become like a bigger and bigger name in the world, like the second and third order differences that you make in other people's lives. So the example that we used was last year, myself and my friends, we went to VCon for its first year ever. And during that weekend, myself, my business partner Deepak, and homeboy Brendan behind the camera, we ended up booking a 6-week Airbnb in Miami. None of us really expected much out of it. All three of us decided to move to Miami. Brendan has since met a girl who's now his girlfriend in Miami. Deepak has since met a girl who is now his girlfriend and one of our roommates here in Miami. I've had the time of my life meeting so many fascinating people and completely changing what I viewed was possible out of life in the last year since that event. And those are like the second and third order differences that people like Gary never get to see.
Mm-hmm.
So him just putting out content allowed us to go to his conference, which then allowed us to have the position for the whole trajectory of the rest of our lives to shift, alter, and change. What an incredible thing that is, that like the smallest little things that you can do, like just putting a video out, just speaking your mind, just being honest, just having a conversation with somebody, could then have such a beautiful butterfly effect that the entire trajectory of the rest of your life and existence could lead to something so beautiful. The people that create never get to see that impact.
Yeah.
They only get to see them when they occasionally meet and intersect, but Gary's not going to meet every person that he's touched and impacted.
Yeah.
Neither am I, neither are you, neither is any person that's ever made a video, even if it's seen by 12 people. Mm-hmm. You never get to see that. And I think that's such a beautiful thought exercise to go through.
Yeah. And I think, in this day of social media, and I went through this personally, like there were many years of me being a young entrepreneur and just a young adult that I was so hesitant to step in front of a camera, that I was so insecure about how I looked, what I was going to say, how I said it, how my voice sounded, all these things that stopped me from sharing what I know, sharing my experiences. And like you said, if you have the courage to just put yourself out there, and it's not easy, it doesn't come naturally to me. If you have the courage to do that, I think you can also have the comfort of knowing that your words may really change somebody's life. Really, you might say the exact thing that they need to hear in that moment. And that's the thing that made their day better. That's the thing that made them make a decision that made their life better. And so, I think there's so many people still struggling with this, right? Still like just fighting with their own insecurities, that they feel very vulnerable putting themselves out there. But I think, the mindset really to have is that you have something to give the world. Every single one of us does. And like you said yesterday when we were chatting, it's a shame for you not to show that to the world.
How were you able to get past those insecurities of putting yourself in front of the camera? Like, how did you go from I'm too insecure to share myself to I'm going to do this every day?
Yeah, that's a really great question. I think two things. One is understanding that concept that, I have something to share, and I hope that it can impact somebody who I might not even ever know that I had an impact on them. But two, more practically, it was practicing. It was starting my TikTok. It was putting the camera, putting the phone in front of my face and recording lots of terrible, terrible videos. It's saying yes to, when people ask me to be on their podcast. And there were so many that were terrible. And there's so many videos of me that, look terrible, but it's all part of that journey. And you must go through that to get better. There are very few people, I think, that just come on and they can do it immediately. And so for me, it was just getting used to even just the, very basic steps of how to do it. Getting used to seeing myself, on a screen. That really makes it easier every time.
It sounds to me like there's a couple themes in there that you kind of looked at. The first one is just saying yes. So when an opportunity presents itself, you say yes. It's a very entrepreneurial trait that I think you've always lived your life by.
Yeah.
When opportunity arises, Denise says yes. The next thing is giving yourself the permission to suck. And I think that's something especially adults suck at. Like everyone, when it comes to whether it's making content, learning an instrument, playing a new sport, I feel like it's so natural to feel like you should be better at it than you actually are when you first begin. And it takes a substantial amount of humility to take a step backwards, realize I am supposed to suck right now. Yep. I'm actually not supposed to be good. The purpose of me is that I suck and I do it anyways, whether you're in the gym, whether you're making videos. And those that are able to get through that phase are the only ones that are capable of seeing the fruits of their own labor.
Yeah.
And that's something I do admire in what you do. And your whole message is that you had the humility to say, I don't care if I suck right now. I'm doing it anyways.
Yeah.
And it goes back to the confidence that we were just talking about, because you can't be insecure and give yourself permission to suck.
Yeah.
So I give you a lot of applause for
Thank you. And I think to add on to that, don't be afraid to get feedback either. And don't be afraid to ask for help. I think that so many people are afraid of showing people, I'm not good at this thing. And then they don't progress because at the end of the day, you don't know what you don't know. You either need somebody to teach you that or you're going to find out for yourself, and especially in business, but with everything, like, if you have a coach, if you have a mentor, if you have somebody who's done it before who can take you to that next step, it is so helpful for your journey. And this is another lesson that I learned as a solo founder who spent a lot of years thinking like, I'm going to grind it out myself. I'll figure things out. I'm going to learn. Like I don't want to burden other people with my problems. I'm realizing that asking for help is not a bad thing. Asking for help is not a sign of weakness. It's a sign of strength. It's a sign of confidence. It's a sign of humility. And to be able to pull your network together and see the beauty that comes out of people's generosity is a beautiful thing. And I can tell you that, I've spoken with a lot of people who are few steps, maybe 100 steps ahead of me. And a lot of times, because they can relate to the position that I'm in, they are so willing to share an experience of their own that helped them get to the next step. They're so willing to say, hey, have you tried this? Or maybe try this. This worked for me, But when you are like in your shell and saying like, oh, I can't tell people I'm struggling with my business. I can't tell people like, I can't figure this out. Like, you are never going to get somebody that says like, hey, you look like you're struggling with your business. It's very rare. So I think, again, with the humility and being a little bit vulnerable, asking for help is something that we all need to learn how to do better. And also learning to accept that help and listen to that help is a really important part of growth.
When was the last time that Denise went out, asked for help during a time you needed it most?
I'm asking for help right now, actually. So, my business is at a point where we are almost at that next phase of growth.
And be specific on that so people understand, like, it's not a small...
Yeah, so, we are really at the cusp of becoming an 8-figure business, which is very, very exciting. And I know that we're going to get there, this year, in the next 12 months, whatever it is. But as somebody who's never done it before, never been in a situation where I've seen it hands-on, how to do it, I don't know what I don't know. And with any business, there's so many different things you can focus on, right? Is it marketing? Is it the product? Is it better team? Is it more money? Like, so many questions that I have. And, I wish I did this exercise of finding advisors, putting together an advisory board sooner. So I'm doing it right now.
Mm-hmm.
And really kind of tapping into the knowledge of the collective and really finding those people who are willing to help me get to that next step. So in addition to putting together an advisory board, I've also, signed up with a growth marketing agency that has the experience of taking brands, up to the level that I want and beyond. And so for me, having people who have done it a few times on my side is really exciting because I know it's going to supercharge our growth.
And like, I don't know if this is too business personal, but are you giving up equity to achieve those results?
For the advisors, typically, yes. Okay. So I will be giving up some equity. It's a very small amount in the grand scheme of things, and that's very standard for an advisor. Mm-hmm. But yes, because you want them to care about your business. You want them to care about, exactly. You have to align everybody's incentives in the right way so that everybody wins together.
So that's like a humility, like a humble experience in itself, where it's saying this baby of Alala has been my thing for 10 years. It's like this little child that I brought from nothing into a nearly 8-figure teenager now.
Yeah.
And now you're saying oh, but we're about to co-parent with a few other people. They're going to have literal skin in the game. That has to be you have to completely remove the ego out of the equation to do that.
You have to completely remove your ego because I know that I'm going to get the questions. Why didn't you do this already? You probably should have done this thing that you didn't do 3 years ago. And I'm going to have a lot of feedback that's oh yeah, I probably should have. And it's going to be an experience where I have to be so humble and listen because I've asked these people for help. If you're asking people for help, you better listen, to what they have to say. And just be very accepting. I think there is this myth in entrepreneurship and the story that, magazines and the media love to tell. It's wow, you started and then it just kept growing and growing and growing. And now you sold it for millions and millions of dollars. The reality is so far removed from a straight line trajectory up, right? I think we can all agree that there are so many ups and downs in the process and people don't see that and people don't talk about the mistakes they made, the failures they had, how long they really slogged at their business to make it the way that it is today. And so I think just having that one gentleness with yourself to say it's okay to make mistakes. It's okay that I, didn't know how to do this thing, but then be humble enough to then take the advice of other people and actually do the thing that they tell you to do. All for the sake of really growing the business for everybody.
I think that's really admirable. And there's one thing in particular I've noticed in your behavior with your language the last day and a bit that I love and I find so interesting. So I'm going to call you out on this a bit, but there have been many times where we'll have, say, a video script and we'll say female entrepreneur and you always change it to just entrepreneur. What is your position on female entrepreneurs or you're just an entrepreneur? Why do you always make that distinction?
That's really interesting because I don't consciously do it, but I'm obviously doing it since you noticed. To me, there isn't a difference. We're all people. We all have a brain. Yes, are there physical differences? Of course. Are there external perceptions of a woman starting a business and a man starting a business? I do believe there are, conscious or subconsciously. But I don't think it is necessarily a benefit or a crutch. And so I feel like when people always say, oh, she's a female entrepreneur, female millionaire, female something, they're like qualifying it in a way that it, like, why does it matter? Why does it matter if she's a girl, you know, or why does it matter? Because she's accomplished this thing. But I do think it's also really important, you know, to acknowledge that certain groups have certain, you know, similarities. So I can relate a lot to being a female entrepreneur because I am one, and we have different, you know, we're brought up a different way sometimes than men are. So I do think it's important to acknowledge that it's a distinction, but it's not a qualification or like a disqualification.
Yeah, so you're basically saying it's just like you're an entrepreneur, whether you're a man or woman. There's no distinction between, we don't say male entrepreneur.
Yeah, exactly.
Right? It's like all of a sudden we then just add that label in front of it, which creates like an asterisk.
Exactly. And I don't think it needs to be there. I don't think it's something that female entrepreneurs need to like use as a crutch, nor as, you know, a benefit. It is just the way that it is. And I think like that whole era of the girl boss, right, was like a really big thing 10 years ago when I started my business. And you can see the backlash now because why does it matter? Why is she a girl boss? You're just a boss. You're doing the thing. And, you know, I don't think it really makes a difference.
Layla Hormozi's big on that as well. She talks about, she's like, I'm not a female entrepreneur. I'm just an entrepreneur.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I'm not a girl boss. I'm just a boss.
Mm-hmm.
And I do think that's like a powerful distinction because eliminating that, just that little label at the beginning, it just creates everything that's so much more of an eye level experience, in my opinion. But one thing we also discussed a little bit that I'd love your input on is, like, for you as a woman who is an entrepreneur, how do you balance like the sort of masculine and feminine traits that you have to bring forth to the table every day?
Yeah, so that's a really interesting question. Everybody has masculine energy and feminine energy. And in business, a lot of times you're tapping into your masculine energy, right? It's more forceful. It's more direct. It is a push energy. You're pushing things forward. You're always making decisions. You're, you know, really like propelling your business forward. And that takes up, I think, a lot of, you know, an entrepreneur's energy. And what I learned from somebody who, you know, is a more spiritual person, a more like, she's a shaman actually. And what she had said that really stuck with me is that your feminine energy is more of a pull energy, and tapping into your feminine energy, and everybody has it, not just women, men and women both have it. Tapping into your feminine energy allows you to be more magnetic and allows you to attract things into yourself. And for me, I can relate to that so much because I find myself pushing away the feminine a lot of the time, right? In favor of this more like push. Oh, I'm going to push my business forward. I'm going to like make it this thing. Instead of saying like, oh, I'm going to attract in my ideal clients. I'm going to attract in more business. So her suggestion, which I take to heart, is to find ways of tapping into both your energies. So if you're feeling, you know, not in your feminine energy, some of the things that she says you can do, like, you know, wear the clothes that make you feel feminine. It doesn't have to be a dress. It can be whatever that, you know, maybe it's a color that you love. You know, wear your hair the way you like it. Or, you know, go and take a belly dancing class or take something that allows you personally to feel feminine. And that way you really can access that like attracting in versus like kind of forcing it out.
So it's all about like, it's getting into like your manifestation energy.
Yeah. Where
life comes to you as opposed to like you going to it.
Exactly.
I love that. And I think what's really interesting there too is like, there is a balance that I even feel like men can tap into that too, right? Because I think so many dudes just go full steam ahead and they get so direct and so blunt and so, and maybe even I do this a bit too, but it's like you get so caught up in the testosterone of just being a guy sometimes that you forget that, hey, like compassion goes a long way more than just business, but in life. And that's a skill that I think is also not taught in schools, that compassion and how you phrase things and your choice of diction matters a lot. The phrases and the precise of how precise your language is really, really matters in life and getting your message across. But more than just the language and the vocabulary that you decide, it's the tone of the voice that you decide to use. Changing it so you can be a little bit more gentle.
Yeah.
Knowing how to raise it up when you want to be tough.
Yep.
And just being a little bit more calm when you need to.
See, even when you are speaking softer, I'm drawn to lean into you, right? You're attracting me in. And to understand that is very, very powerful. And to use that is also a very powerful thing.
It's a superpower.
It's a superpower.
It's like almost a whisper, but it's like, I really, really think that this is a type of tone that if I want somebody that's across from me to like really take what I'm saying seriously, I'll speak like this.
Yeah.
Because it's soft, it's gentle, and it's easy to listen to, where I enunciate things a little bit more clearly. And that, like those little things actually make such a big difference in life.
Huge. Huge.
And I think that's something that women do a lot better than men. Typically. But has there ever been an instance with you where you as a woman in business weren't taken seriously by men around you? Or have you just been like so tapped in the whole time you're like, doesn't matter?
Yes. So when I worked for my old boss, Chris, it was mainly a team of men. And, you know, when we went on business trips, a lot of times it was me and several guys. And I think in those situations, you realize that you don't have access to some things that the guys do, just by, you know, the fact that you are a woman. So I'm going to speak more generally, golf trips, you know, like now I think it's better, but I think a lot of times, like, you know, women felt excluded when they went on these business meetings and things, and all the guys went to play golf and they were left behind. So I do think there are instances where, you know, you are not the same as them. And I think that comes, you know, it becomes very clear. But again, I don't think that, you know, you can use that as a crutch almost. For me, I always just found ways to get FaceTime with the people that I wanted, provide value in different ways. But I think it's a very much a product of human nature that you feel the most comfortable and the most open with the people that you're almost the most similar with.
I think that makes sense. And I think there's like a common theme with everything that you've done throughout this whole conversation is you don't seem like the type of person that allows things to get too personal. Is that something that's true?
Yes. I'm not a person that allows things to get too personal, but I think that is a good thing and sometimes a hindrance to me. I'm a person who's like, I think emotional range is not as broad or as wide as some other people, in the sense that when I'm really happy, I'm not like screaming and running around my apartment. And when I'm really sad, you know, I don't kind of fall into like a really, really deep hole either. And that's maybe part of like how I grew up. Maybe it's just part of my own personality. But for me, the way that it's worked is that I'm pretty level-headed through a lot of the stresses in business, in life, in failures and success. And so I don't let success get too much to me, but I also don't let the failure get too much to me. And I can kind of like move on from that pretty easily. But sometimes I do feel like, wow, like, you know, maybe if I felt stronger, deeper, heavier, it could help me. It could help me kind of propel myself to the next level more. And so that's something I'm still trying to figure out, what the right balance is.
What emotions do you wish you felt stronger? Is that sadness? Like, a lot of people say anger is very much a utility.
Yeah.
If you tap into it. Like, what are the ones that you really feel like I could use more of that?
The biggest feeling that I wish I could tap more into actually is the joy part. And we've talked a lot about this in the last day. There's something about celebrating your achievements and celebrating small moments that I really wish I did more of in this entrepreneurial journey that I've been on, but honestly, throughout my whole life. I wish that, when we hit $1 million, that I celebrated more and that I imprinted that joy into my body and that experience into my body at that time. And, my mindset at the point where we got $1 million was honestly, well, it should get to $1 million, just the same way, like I should have graduated from business school. I should have always been successful in my career. Of course your business gets to $1 million. It was more like achieving something that was so obvious versus it being like, oh my God, like I did this amazing thing. And so for me, my journey is really in balancing my expectations with also being able to celebrate those moments in between. Because I think a lot of people can relate to having really big goals, right? Really, really big goals. I know you want to do so much with your business, but you can also celebrate and not be at that big goal yet. Those things are not, mutually exclusive. I think you can do both and you should do both. You should have those big goals and you should also celebrate your milestones.
I very deeply relate to that specific example because about 2 months ago, we as a business did our millionth dollar and didn't celebrate.
Yeah.
It was a quick little dap up. It was like, let's go. And then that was it. No dinner, no nothing. It was like, we just got back to work. And I've thought about that since. And I was like, we probably should have had some small ritual to celebrate that as like a big milestone. Now that's not $1 million in a year. That's since the conception of the company. But those little things of like finding joy in your own progress. And I think as business owners, it's very easy to not do that. It's very easy just to remain stoic and calm and chill and to kind of gaslight yourself and say it's like, yeah, well, of course that happened.
Yeah.
But if you were to tell like 21-year-old Jamey that I did that, he'd be like, what the fuck?
Yeah.
And he'd be so stoked for me. But for whatever reason, 26-year-old Jamey wasn't as stoked as what he would have been 5 years ago because there was this like expectation that of course it was going to happen. So it's almost as if taking the time to realize and recognize that a former version of you would be thrilled to be the current version that you are.
Yep.
And I don't think enough people do a good job at that, including me. But with that said, I'm going to end on this last question, and this is the same one that I gave the first guest, John. A lot of people go the opposite way with this question. But if 15-year-old Denise and 40-year-old Denise were to meet right now, what do you think 15-year-old Denise would say to you?
Great question. If I were to meet my 15-year-old self today at the age of 40,
what would she say to you?
I think she would say that she's really proud of me and she cannot believe all the things that we've done over the last, 25 years. And I think that I would have made her proud, but not only because of my external accomplishments, but really because I paid attention to her and I made an effort to go inside myself and reconnect with her. because that's what I did over the last few years. I made an effort to remember and recognize my inner child. And I pulled out actually a lot of the qualities that I loved and missed about my younger self. Her joy, her optimism, her sense that she could do anything, be anybody. And I think as adults, we lose so much of that. But in a way, like, you always have that 7-year-old, that 15-year-old, that 21-year-old inside you. And being able to go back and listen to her and say, like, I see you, I recognize you, and I'm going to do those things. I remember those things that you wanted to do. I remember that person you wanted me to be, and actually do them and become that person. I think she would be really proud of that.
And does that align with what 40-year-old Denise is telling herself now?
I think so.
That's good. That's because that's the point of the question.
Yeah. Yeah. I think she would be really excited to see where we are today.
I love that. And with that, that wraps up episode 2 of Commonly Vulnerable. So Denise Lee, thank you for taking the time to sit across the chair and get open.
Yeah. Thank you for having me.
Thank you so much for watching this episode. If you could, give this a follow or subscribe and check out our other episodes. Last week, we had John Mixis. Next week, we have an interview with myself coming up where Brendan St. Brown interviews me to get to know the host a little bit more. Really excited for the rest of this series, so make sure you stay tuned because we're only doing 20 episodes of this podcast. Thank you very much for watching and listening, and I hope to see you on the next one. Cheers.